It's already been a fascinating day, and I've had a ton of thoughts about all kinds of things. Although dating is always, of course, a perennial problem, perhaps the earliest extant pre-modern Tamil treatment of Dundan's Kavyadarsa occurs in the 5th and final chapter of the Viracoliyam. As numerous studies of the Viracoliyam make clear, the first verse of the Pairam, or introduction of unknown authorship, attributes the text to one Buddhamitran in Tamil, literally friend of the Buddha, who is called the Lord of Ponpatri. There's been a lot of debate over where Ponpatri might be. Dating of the text has largely relied thus far on references to the Viracoliyam's royal patron in the 3rd verse of the introduction, as Viracholan, generally identified as an epithet of Virarajendra Chola, who ruled briefly in the 3rd quarter of the 11th century. In 181 verses, the Viracoliyam, following the combined treatment of grammar and poetics established in Tamil by the earlier Tolkapiam that Jennifer mentioned, addresses Yeruthu or phonemes, soul or morphemes, and Porul, classical poetics, adding additional chapters on Yapu, meter, and Alankaram, ornament, where Buddhamitran notes explicitly in the section's opening verse that he follows Dundan or Dundee. The iteration of Dundan's Kavyadarsa that occupies the text's final 41 verses, might be the shortest iteration of Dundan we see, is but one element in a much larger effort at theorizing Tamil grammar and poetics through Sanskrit categories and modes of analysis. I like very much this morning Andrew's invocation of Rorty's final vocabulary. Sanskrit is consistently termed either Vadamori, northern language, or Vadanul, northern texts. The 3rd verse of the introduction characterizes the work simply as summarizing its 5 topics according to the traditions of Sanskrit texts, Vadanul Marapam. Dundan's or Dundee's is the only specific Vadanul or northern book cited by the Viracoliyam. Buddhamitran mentions Dundan or Dundee or Tantiyar 3 times in his treatment of poetic ornament and follows the Kavyadarsa quite closely, if very, very tersely, in the ensuing discussion. But the strong influence of Sanskrit theorization is evident in each section of the Tamil text. In particular, what I'd like to focus on today is how the 5th and final section of the Viracoliyam and its treatment of Dundan fits into the larger project of explaining Tamil through Sanskrit. While the Viracoliyam is perhaps the first Tamil text to attempt to theorize its own language and poetic tradition through Sanskrit, other such attempts will be made, but not for more than 600 years. As Jennifer's work with the smaller group no doubt has made clear, Tamil literary culture itself feels the need for another more complete iteration of Dundan, perhaps less than a century or so after the Viracoliyam. 2 additional points of background should perhaps be made before we delve into the iteration of Dundan and the use of Sanskrit. First, that the Viracoliyam seeks to tie the language and poetics it theorizes through Sanskrit frameworks to some sort of Buddhist commitment or community is made clear as early as the 2nd verse of the introduction. Here the text is described as explicating, quote, the cool Tamil that was heard by Agastya at the site of Avalohidan or Avalokiteshvara of beautiful qualities, thus claiming that the great sage Agastya, portrayed as master of both Tamil and Sanskrit throughout South Indian literary tradition, learned Tamil from the great Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Avalohidan is again invoked in verse 83 that concludes the Viracoliyam's discussion of morphology, a section of the text that is particularly laden with Sanskrit terminology and definition. Here the language thus described is named, quote, the true Tamil of Avalohidan, whose glory shines in 1,000 ways, end quote. Second, in the penultimate commentarial verse, the Viracoliyam commentary is attributed to one Perundevan or Mahadeva in Sanskrit, who composed what he calls a brief commentary as a duty for those who study Tamil language with affection. The reference to compositional duty or kadan has led several scholars to suppose that Perundevanar was Buddhamitran's own student, placing him in the late 11th or early 12th century, smack dab in the Tantiyar moment that Jennifer and David both noted. The many poetic illustrations that the commentary deploys, there are none in the text itself, they're all in the commentary, draw from Sangam-like classical anthologies, the 5th century Tirukural, the now lost Buddhist Kundala Kesi, the 10th century Yaparungalam of Amita Sakarar and its anonymous commentary, and a host of other unidentified sources reveal a broad engagement with Tamil literature composed before the 12th century. As such, Perundevanar's work marks the beginning of a veritable explosion in the production of commentaries on grammar, literary theory, and literature itself, fully half the extant commentary literature in Tamil can be dated between the 12th and 14th centuries. The commentary obviously shares with its root text the goal of providing a theory of language and poetics as part of a unified or integrated enterprise, and expands considerably upon the relationship between Tamil grammar and forms of poetic expression and those of Vadanul, or northern language, at multiple points. In fact, Perendevanar makes a rather startling comment on the Viracoliyam's opening verse on Sanskrit dhatu, claiming not only, quote, that Sanskrit is the mother of all Tamil words, end quote, but also that Sanskrit usage applies to Tamil as well. The commentary also provides any number of striking poetic examples, many Buddhist from unknown sources, that provide a glimpse, as I've suggested in earlier publications, of a perhaps much larger Buddhist literature composed in Tamil. Given the constraints of time, I'll be focusing primarily on the presentation in the Viracoliyam, referring to the commentary only occasionally, as it certainly has its very own different and distinct interpretive aims. Overall, Puttamitran's presentation of the Alankara might be said to follow Dundan's Kavyadarsa loosely and tersely, and largely consists of lists of the Alankaram and their varieties. Again, the illustrations are all in the commentary. To summarize the final 41 verses of the text in brief, the Viracoliyam opens its treatment of poetic ornament, as above, by explicitly citing Dundee with a beautiful image of literature personified, with poetic language as the body, life or breath as the content or theme, rhythm as the complexion, style as movement, and alankaram obviously as ornamentation. The next two verses describe themes and characteristics both suitable and unsuitable to poetry. Suitable vocabulary should be in agreement with tradition, contain no Sanskrit yerata or phonemes, possess sweetness, and be easily interpreted. Their opposites are unsuitable for poetry. Suitable poetic themes provide pleasure for their audience, are complete, and should not contradict tradition. Their opposites are unsuitable to poetry. Vaidarbhi and Gaudiya styles are briefly explained, again closely following Dundan, and then the 10 characteristics of good poetry are outlined, again closely following Dundan. Next, the Arthalankara are listed, beginning with Tanmay, or Swabhavokti, and ending with Bhavikam, or Bhavika. Buddhamitran then lists 32 types of simile. The following verse names three constituents of a simile, followed by a unique fourfold classification on the grounds of comparison of quality, of utility, of action, and shape, and a list of 3 registers of comparison: praising, disparaging, or realistic description. An additional verse names several other varieties of simile, perhaps those of rival schools or alternative theorizations of literary adornment. Buddhamitran then goes on to name varieties of rupaka, akshepa, vyatireka, and he very briefly defines the ornaments of vibhavana, samashokti, atishaya, upreksha, hetu, shukshma, lesha, and so on, none of the 3 that you asked us to talk about in the meeting tomorrow evening. The 36th verse notes 4 types of poetic composition: mutaka, kulaha, tohai, which is a Tamil translation of Sanskrit kosha, and kapyam, or kavya, defined by Puttamitran as a great work or manul. A single verse each briefly addresses first Shabdalankara, then Chitrakavya. After carefully distinguishing between Viravyal as a mixing of Sanskrit letters or sounds, Vadayarata with Tamil, and Manipravalam as the mixing of Sanskrit words, Devasol with Tamil, the Viracoliyam concludes by offering yet another classification, a twofold system of literary classification into Tore Kavi and Kilavi Kavi, and I'll say more about this in a moment. The result of poetry, Porul, is said to be Dharma or Aram, Kama, Yinbam, and Moksha Vida. That's it, 41 verses on Dundan. Recent work on both the Viracoliyam itself and on the wider medieval Tamil literary world in which it participates sheds additional light on the text. Studies by various scholars of Tamil linguistics, for example, have explored in depth the unique features of the Viracoliyam's treatment of yerata, phonology, literally letter, and sol, again, morphology, literally word, in its opening 2 chapters, particularly in view of their obvious engagement with Sanskrit traditions of Vyakarana. Various scholars have similarly done much to map out broader developments in Tamil poetic theory and literary and religious culture more generally in the era of the Viracoliyam's composition. Both the Viracoliyam and its commentary are theoretical enterprises that attempt to integrate at least two intertwined sets of discursive practice. First, the Tamil grammar and poetics as a single topic, and second, the approaches to grammar and poetics taken by earlier scholars working in both Tamil and Sanskrit. Recognizing the Viracoliyam and its commentary as distinct yet obviously intimately related theoretical endeavors, both are set here in the broader context of developments in Tamil theory itself, in the emergence of South Indian commentarial practices on grammatical and literary topics, and in wider patterns of grammatical and theoretical engagement on the part of Buddhist scholars throughout South Asia working in multiple languages. What renders the Viracoliyam and its commentary so unique in Tamil and literary grammatical history, their open acknowledgement of theoretical indebtedness to Vadanul or Sanskrit books, their insistence on theorizing grammar and poetics as part of a single project during a 1,000-year span when no other scholars do so in Tamil, seems much less striking in the context of Buddhist innovations in grammar and poetics throughout the medieval South Asian world. On the other hand, contextualizing the two works more firmly in their South Indian, i.e. largely non-Buddhist intellectual milieu, reading both less for their Buddhist elements, more for their primary comments regarding Tamil grammatical and poetic theory, sets each in a complex network of arguments and counter-arguments regarding the very nature of language and literature. In other words, reading the Viracoliyam and its commentary as both Buddhist and Tamil, as both unique and fully participating in broader conversations across the spectrum of South Asian Buddhist and South Indian Tamil intellectual cultures, serves to highlight certain aspects of both texts that have thus far received little scholarly attention. When considered in light of Tamil literary and grammatical theory in the 11th and early 12th century and the medieval Chola period more generally, both the Viracoliyam and the commentary are quite striking in multiple ways. Among the most obvious, perhaps, is the Viracoliyam's return to the authority of the Tolhapiam to frame the discussion of grammar and poetics in terms of yerete soul and an albeit expanded sense of porul or poetics. As I just mentioned briefly, no other Tamil theoretical text apart from the Viracoliyam treats phonology, morphology, and poetics as integral aspects of a single theory of language and literature in the near millennium that separates the Tolhapiam from the Viracoliyam's nearest chronological successor, the 17th century Ilakana Vilakam. While the production of literary and grammatical theory appears to accelerate during the period of Chola dominance, the forms such theorizing takes are narrower in scope, focusing either on a specific aspect of Tamil poetics or on yerete and soul to the exclusion of poetics or porul. Yet as the Viracoliyam signals some manner of fealty to the authority of the Tolhapiam's theoretical stance, the text also decidedly ignores or eschews those narratives of the sources of the Tolhapiam's authority that were widely circulating in Tamil literary culture by the 11th century. According to the well-known story first laid out in Nakiranar's 8th century commentary on the Irayana Ahupurol, the Pandyan kings of Madurai established 3 literary sangams, the first of which enclosed both Agastya and Shiva himself, and which looks to Agastya's text, the Akatiyam, as a primary theoretical reference. The 2 subsequent sangams, of course, in typical South Asian thinking, diminished in size and longevity, and the Tolhapiam assumed its place alongside the Akatiyam as a primary reference work during the second sangam. Tamil texts after Nakiranar's commentary increasingly position Agastya as both the conduit of Sanskritic culture to the south and the devotee of Shiva who first learned Tamil directly from the Lord himself. Indeed, the association of Agastya with Shiva would eventually spread far beyond the Tamil-speaking region to Southeast Asia and Nepal. As Kamban proclaims in the 12th century in a decidedly Shaiva context, Agastya, quote, gave the world Tamil as the god Shiva, whose red eye burns in his beautiful forehead, gave it to him. While not all Chola era grammatical or poetic theories necessarily link the origins of Tamil to Shiva, Agastya, or the narrative of the 3 Pandyan-sponsored sangams, the 10th century Yapalungara Kalihe, for example, associates Tamil grammar with the Pandyan ruler and the sage of the mountain, glossed by the commentator as Agastya, without any mention of divine beings or poetic assemblies. The Viracoliyam does more than simply elide any linkage to Agastya, to Shiva, in the manner of the Yapalungalam Karihe and the other texts and commentaries authored perhaps by Jains. In its first mention of Agastya, in the second verse of the introduction, the source of Agastya's Tamil is not Shiva but Avalohidan, associated in the following verse not with any Sangam sponsored by Pandyan kings, but with Viracoliyam, and in the previous verse with he who sat in eminence under the Bodhi tree, i.e. the Buddha. In the only other mention of Agastya by name in the Viracoliyam, in verse 76, in the midst of a discussion of kriya, finite verbs, the first and second person endings of tain, yin, irgal, and so forth are said to be those of, quote, the true Tamil spoken by Agastya of Mount Bodhium. Thus the Viracoliyam stands alone in both, first, ignoring contemporary narratives of Agastya, Pandyan poetic assemblies, and Shiva, and two, assigning the origins of a Tamil text to at least a quasi-divine figure other than Shiva. In the context of a grammatical and literary theory produced in Tamil during the centuries of Chola rule, in other words, its identification of the Bodhisattva Avalohidan as the source of what they call over and over again true Tamil, the text describes, constitutes something of an audacious argument, a recentering of the origins of Tamil grammar and poetics away from Pandyan courts and Shaiva devotees. That such true Tamil, born of Avalohidan and sanctioned by Agastya, is theorized through the tradition of Sanskrit texts, alongside the commitment to the basic approach of the Tolhapiam as noted above, renders the Viracoliyam unique in Tamil grammatical and literary theory until the early modern period and the analogous efforts of the Ilakana Vilakam. Yet the Viracoliyam's appropriation of the analytic lenses of Vadamori or Northern language is quite markedly different and differently marked according to the specific topic under discussion. While its treatment of Yerita and Soul, morphemes and phonemes, reveals a consistent interest in appropriating for Tamil the technical vocabulary of Sanskrit Vyakarana discourse and its understandings of word formation, the ensuing discussions of Purul and Yapa draw very little upon Varanul. In its final chapter on poetic ornament, however, the Viracoliyam's indebtedness to Dandan and the Kavyadarsa is obvious, as I noted before. The Viracoliyam's level of engagement with Sanskrit is complex, displaying neither what has been called the so-called shallowness of other medieval Tamil treatments of Varanul, nor what have been called the clumsiness of earlier Tamil efforts at first translation. The Viracoliyam clearly knows and anticipates an audience who knows full well both extant Tamil literary and grammatical theory and their nearest Sanskrit analogues. The chapter on Yerita, for example, organizes itself entirely around Sandhi, the morphophonemic changes wrought by the combination of letters. 3 verses in particular transliterate critical Sanskrit terms into Tamil and apply basic rules of Vadamori to euphonic combination. Lopa, Agama, Adesha, for example, describe processes of elision, augmentation, and substitution. Sanskrit rules of vowel incrementation, guna, and vritti are also introduced. The Viracoliyam gives more attention to soul than any other topic, 55 verses, and the basic organizational structure of the discussion reveals something of the text's deep commitment to theorizing Tamil language through Sanskrit analytic frameworks. Not only are the 6 padalam or sub-chapters organized around basic topics of Sanskrit Vyakarana, case endings, upakara, compounds, nominal derivatives, verbal roots, verbal derivatives, but evidence of direct borrowing or paraphrasing from Sanskrit sources is also evident, although unlike the final chapter's invocation of Dandan, no specific texts or scholars are mentioned. I'll get back to that in a minute. The Tolhapiam defines soul as that which conveys meaning, soul or word. The Viracoliyam borrows directly from the Sanskrit tradition in defining pada in the Mirna of Padani, stating that the particle su is added to nouns in the nominative singular and then dropped. In the same vein, some evidence suggests that the Viracoliyam's treatment of tohai or compounds, samasa, paraphrases, at least in part, the karikas or on samasa attributed to Vararuchi. The first verse on dhatu explicitly states that Tamil dhatu should be formed by analogy with those of Varanul. As noted above, the interweaving of Tamil and Sanskrit becomes even more apparent in the final chapter on poetic ornament. The formation of Tamil words in accordance with Sanskrit principles and the composition of Tamil poetry in accordance with Sanskrit theories of ornamentation, all framed with the authoritative Tolhapiam rubric of treating grammar, and poetics as a single topic constitute the heart of the Viracoliyam's project. The Viracoliyam's innovations, however, are by no means limited to the incorporation of Sanskritic principles of language and poetics. In the context of outlining classical Sangam Aham poetics in its chapter on Portal, to cite but one example of many, a uniquely Tamil literary milieu that does not easily allow for the intervention of Vadanul or Sanskrit works, the Viracoliyam echoes Yaparungalam Virati's division into four thematic categories of Aham Puram, which you've heard about a little bit, Aham Puram and Pura Puram, and offers its own unique list of 27 elements of Aham poetry. Various of these elements in combination yield the three other thematic categories of Puram, Ahapuram, and Purapuram. So it's got its own unique way of talking about classical Tamil poetics. The Viracoliyam commentary also provides an extended treatment of Maypada as the aspect of Aham poetics, defined by Perendevanar, perhaps quoting another source, as, quote, the manifestation that arises in the body and the verbal expression of that state. The Viracoliyam, in other words, develops a unique structure of love poetry with a particular focus on the proper language of poetry, while its commentary theorizes unique elements in the sequencing of Aham or love poetic events. Much scholarship on the Viracoliyam to date has asked whether or not this analysis of Tamil grammar and poetics through Sanskrit lenses adds anything to the development of Tamil theory, whether it works or not. Yet whether or not the Viracoliyam and its project of analyzing Tamil through Sanskrit finds an audience in the language politics of Tamil Nadu today, which it largely does not, the very project itself epitomizes the processes of vernacularization that swept across South Asia in the medieval period, the theorization through Sanskrit of local languages and literatures at the nexus of high culture and royal power. Yet unlike the other vernaculars of southern India, Tamil had already been theorized apart from the direct references to Vadamuli in the Tolkappiyam and its successors. The Viracoliyam difference lies in the paraphrasing of Panini and Vararuchi, in its organization according to Sanskrit discursive practices of phonology and morphology, and its direct rendering of the work of Dandan into Tamil. In the context of alternative approaches to grammatical and literary theory extant in Tamil in the 11th and 12th centuries, the projects of the Viracoliyam and its commentary emerge as highly contested. On the one hand, Puttamitran and Purandevanar participate in much wider scholarly conversations of their day regarding the nature of language, literature, genre, and the work of commentary itself. Both the Viracoliyam and its commentary demonstrate extensive engagement with theoretical and literary sources in both Tamil and Sanskrit. Perendevanar, for example, cites the Tolkappiyam, the Yaparungalam and its Virati, and other works now lost, and in addition names a number of theorists who are known only through these fragmentary comments. Yet on the other hand, the position that each assumes, often rooted in the text's commitments to weave together Tamil and Vadamori, reveal vernacularization to be a contentious project in the Tamil-speaking region on multiple levels. First, perhaps, is the issue of what actually constitutes Tamil. What does the Viracoliyam mean precisely by the cool Tamil, the Tan Tamil, that will be explained according to the traditions of northern texts? Before the emergence of colonial language politics in the early 20th century, the relationship of Tamil to language, culture, region, people, and even divinity is often surprisingly difficult to pin down. Indeed, for the Chola-era theorists and commentators with whom Puttamitran and Perendevanar engage, what constitutes Tamil is a matter of obvious debate. Nakiranar's 8th century commentary on the Airayana Ahapuro, for example, that I mentioned before, rather stunningly equates the subject matter of his root text, Aham or inner poetics, with Tamil. While Nakiranar seems here to mark the classical Sangam poetics of love as the epitome of literary expression in Tamil, subsequent theoretical and commentarial works will continue to debate the status of the Sangam anthologies, the proper relationship of Tamil to Vadamori, and as the geographical region where proper standardized Tamil is spoken, as Jennifer Clare's work has shown in abundance. In such a commentarial context, the Viracoliyam's approach to Tamil as both language and literature positions itself quite uniquely. Certainly, Puttamitran and his commentator share in the appeal to Chola patronage that marks so much scholarship of their day. In addition to explicit mention of Viracolan in verse 3 of the introduction, the Viracolan identifies the pure Tamil, the Sen Tamil, that begins with initial sounds ka, ta, sa, and so forth, as that spoken explicitly by Veera Cholan. Yet the geographic heartland of Sen Tamil, interestingly, does not mirror the boundaries of the Chola kingdom that so many medieval Tamil Tolkapiam commentators cite. While the Viracoliyam itself echoes the Tolkapiam's introduction in tracing the boundaries of good Tamil from Venkatam to Kumari, the commentator more narrowly locates the four boundaries of Sen Tamil as the eastern coast, Kumari, Venkatam, and the Kudaham, or the Western Ghats, effectively eliminating for the first time Malayali-speaking region. Villapalai argues by process of elimination that the Viracoliyam actually considers the ancient realm of the Pandyans to be the true center of Sen Tamil. References to corrupt usages in other parts of the Tamil-speaking region, and even in Chola Mandaram, suggest perhaps that the text recenters Sen Tamil in the region that had long been associated with both the Tolkapiam and Sangam poetry. In other words, the Viracoliyam and its commentary both participate in the praise of Chola royal patrons that mark such medieval textual production in Tamil, yet also seek to locate the epicenter of standard proper Tamil beyond the Kaveri River Valley. Is this a nod of respect to a broader geographical vision offered by the Tolkapiam, or as Villapalai speculates, perhaps the work of a Pandyan viceroy of sorts of the Chola ruler? This historical situation that generates this unique Chola-era vision of Tamil-speaking geography will perhaps never be known for sure, but the efforts of both text and commentary to shift contemporary attention away from Chola Mandalam as the heart of literary and grammatical theory in Tamil certainly signals some manner of deliberate authorial choice. Returning to Nakiranar's 8th century equation of Tamil with the central theoretical project of its own central theoretical project of theorizing Aham poetics, the commentator on the Viracoliyam clearly shares much in common with his contemporaries' analysis of the Tolkapiam, yet the actual content of the commentary marks Perundevanar's work as quite unique in several respects. As the recent work of both Jennifer and Eva Wilden makes clear, medieval commentary provides an important locus for the construction of a Tamil literary past via a process of selection and evaluation, a selection process whose criteria often includes concern about ethics or morals. In other words, by the 12th century in Perundevanar's interpretation of the Viracoliyam, the process of debating literary tradition, of selecting and excluding extant works as properly literary or not, and of highlighting various aspects of literary works via citation was already well underway. The Viracoliyam's vision of what counts as authentic Tamil tradition shares far more with the Yapparungalam Viruti's wide-ranging approach to literary theory and poetic canon than when the Tolkapiam's commentators focus on the hegemonic authority of the root text of Sangam literature and its close derivatives. Indeed, Perundevanar cites 41 verses from the Viruti in his treatment of Yappa or meter alone. What precisely is recognized as literary in the Viracoliyam commentary and thus constituted as relevant to Tamil grammatical and literary history? Not surprisingly, the commentary provides glimpses of a perhaps once substantial Buddhist literature in Tamil, versus now lost, but also known to non-Buddhist commentators. Perundevanar, for example, lists a whole variety of texts. I won't go into them now because I'm running out of time. Other aspects of Tamil literary tradition in Perundevanar's day are neither excluded nor ignored. Praise of the Buddha and Bodhisattva is embedded in a Tamil literary canon that is both intersectarian and thoroughly ethicized. Jain verses are cited quite frequently as illustrations from the 8th century book of moral maxims known as the Naladiyar, the 11th century long narrative poem, the Chulamani. The 4th or 5th century Tirukural, perhaps or maybe not, authored by a Jain, is quoted a staggering 58 times throughout the commentary as demonstrated elsewhere. Perundevanar's selections often focus on emphasizing duty, honor, generosity, and the despair wrought by unchecked passion. Given its primary project of describing Tamil grammar and literary expression through the lenses provided by Sanskrit, it is perhaps not surprising that the Viracoliyam and its commentary present unique understandings of literary genre. The ways of classifying literature are taken up for discussion 3 times in the root text. The first in the treatment of prosody or yapu. Here, Puttamitharan divides Sayul, or poetic composition, into two types: Patyam, literature in recognized forms and meters, and Katyam, divided into two classes: poetry in deficient or incorrect form, and prose suffering from similar errors. As noted above, later the Viracoliyam adopts the classification scheme of Dandan in his Kavyadarsa, outlining four types of poetic composition. After carefully distinguishing between Viravyal and Manipravalam, two types of mixing Tamil and Sanskrit, the Viracoliyam offers yet another twofold classificatory system into Todaikavi and Kilavikavi. The first is characterized by a list beginning with 8 themes, from the scorn of a king to the effusive babbling of a drunkard and the power of magicians. That's my favorite one. All 8 characteristics mentioned by name are recognizable, or as recognizable as translations of, the 14 to 18 different elements of the Coliam, literally mixture, an extremely productive genre first theorized in the 12th century Panirupatiyal. Kilavikavi is simply said to exude excellence, or tiram, and possess many fine qualities. The result of poetry, Purul, is again said to be dharma, karma, and kama, and moksha. In commenting on the root text treatment of Chitrakavi, a form of poetry untheorized in Tamil before the Viracoliyam's appropriation of Dandan, and here limited to a stanza, Perundevanar, the commentary, offers yet a fourth mode of classifying literary texts, as Taninilai Sayul, isolated stanza, Todanilai Sayul, connected stanzas, or Tanipata Sayul, single stanza. In short, both Puttamitharan and Purundevanar seem remarkably flexible about classifying Tamil literature, willing and able to work with multiple systems that basically treat both form and content. In other words, 2 of the systems above classify by stanzaic form, one on the basis of acceptable and unacceptable usage. The Viracoliyam's listing of the thematic elements found in Todaikavi in its final verse, perhaps a nod toward the emerging theorization of all Tamil literature in terms of praise genres to the king, also implies some form of critique, as Todaikavi is marked as distinct from the excellence and many fine qualities of Kilavikavi. Is this intended to separate proper Kapiam from new forms of poetic theorization and production? Placed in this context of Tamil theoretical and commentary literature produced prior to and during the Chola period, the Viracoliyam and its commentaries' intellectual projects come into sharper focus. The stance taken toward Vadanul in the Viracoliyam and its commentary are controversial minority positions in a Chola-era literary culture more keenly interested in preserving the traditions of the Tolkappiyam and the Sangama anthologies as authentically Tamil, something Jennifer's written a great deal about, positions that would not be attempted again for another 600 years or so. The Puttamitharan grounds his treatment of Tamil through Sanskrit in the authoritative structures of the Tolkappiyam, and addresses his verses throughout to Tamil language personified as a beautiful woman, obviously signals an intention to root the theoretical potential of Sanskrit in unequivocal respect for, even devotion to, the beauties of Tamil and the authority of Tamil theory. The closest analogues to the Viracoliyam and its commentary in the Chola period are, interestingly enough, theoretical texts all assumed to be of Jain origin. So let's turn now, in my final 5 minutes, to think a little bit about how the Viracoliyam and its commentary fit into the Buddhist world of broader South Asia. That the Viracoliyam and its commentary take up the project of theorizing Tamil grammar and poetics via Sanskrit frameworks as Buddhists in the name of Avalokiteshvara, and in order to explicate the expression of the Bodhisattva's acts of self-sacrifice, seems less surprising, perhaps, in the context of Buddhist innovation in multiple languages across pre-modern South Asia, something I'm assuming we're going to hear more about tomorrow when we turn to Sri Lanka. Although the Viracoliyam stands out in Tamil literary history not only for the theoretical positions it assumes, but for its very existence as a Buddhist text composed in Tamil, one of only 2, both the text and its commentary share in much broader patterns of Buddhist grammatical and literary production. Both texts' Buddhist inclinations, in other words, seem more than coincidental. Before considering how Puttamitharan and Purundevanar participate in broader movements as Buddhists, it is important to acknowledge some key differences in each text, particularly in regard to intellectual focus. Well, the Viracoliyam, for example, might stand out today, particularly in the context of our workshop, for being the first text to say explicitly in Tamil that it follows a particular named Sanskrit teacher, thinker, in its treatment of Alankaram. The text actually devotes far more verses, 51, to morphology than to any other topic. Alankaram, again, gets 41, Yapu 36, Yerata 28, and Porul, Sangam Classics, a mere 21 verses. The author of the Tolhapiyam, I'm sure, would not be pleased. Only the soul chapter is further subdivided. Bhuttamitran displays the most theoretical interest in Sanskrit Vyakarana and Dandan and devotes the least attention to the topic of Sangam poetic theory. On the other hand, the commentarial interests are somewhat the reverse. The commentator devotes relatively little attention to Yerata and soul, primarily glossing and explaining the verse in the root text, but exerts much greater energy on explicating and providing illustrations for the chapters on poetics, particularly Yapa, meter, and Alankaram. While grammar, in other words, demands most of Bhuttamitran's theoretical attention, the explication of literary forms and the anthologization of Tamil verses amenable to Buddhist sensibility constitute the bulk of Perendevanar's effort. While Veera is correct in part in stating that it is not possible to find anything Buddhist within the grammatical portion of the Viracoliyam, the section on soul concludes with a verse outlining the qualities of true Tamil and attributes that language to Avalohidan. The larger project of the text itself, particularly in its appropriation of Vyakarana lenses, in its second chapter might be considered Buddhist from multiple perspectives. First, the introduction's association of Avalokiteshvara with Agastya, and the association as both with Tamil and Sanskrit echoes a long tradition of Buddhist claims to the origins of Sanskrit Vyakarana and their Shaiva counterclaims. While it is possible that the now lost Brihat Katha draws the oldest connection between Shiva and Panini, the first clear textual attestation to the long Paninian tradition that Shiva himself gave the grammarian the Ashtadhyayi can be found in Haradatta's Padmanjari, a commentary on the Kashika Vritti. Perhaps not coincidentally, Haradatta is said to have composed his text in South India during the Chola period. The same verse that Haradatta cites is repeated again in the benediction of the 10th century Rupa Vitara, a rearrangement of the Ashtadhyayi attributed to the 10th century South Indian or Sri Lankan Buddhist monk Dharmakirti. I'll say a bit more about this below. Greetings to Panini, he who received the Sanskrit alphabet from Maheshwara and recited the entire grammar, end quote. Counter to this claim are many Buddhist attestations to the contrary, that the ultimate source of Panini's intellectual achievement is not Shiva, but the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Butsan's 14th century Tibetan history, for example, explicitly states that Buddhist tradition holds the Bodhisattva to be the source of the Ashtadhyayi. Thus, the Viracoliyam's identification of Avalokiteshvara rather than Shiva as the source of Agastya's Tamil, and insistence throughout that the Tamil language described in accordance with Vadanul is the true Tamil of Avalokiteshvara, reflects broader trans-regional and intersectarian conversations about the authoritative sources of language and its theoretical analysis, conversations with which Buddhist thinkers were active participants. More than merely claiming the language it describes for the Bodhisattva, the Viracoliyam's theoretical content actively participates in a robust Buddhist tradition of grammatical innovation. From early practical grammars such as the Kumara Lata and Katantra to more complex treatments of Panini and Patanjali in the 5th century Chandra Vyakarana attributed to Chandragoman. Of particular interest in the case of the Viracoliyam is the 10th century Rupa Vitara that I just mentioned, attributed to Dharmakirti, not the Dharmakirti of philosophical fame. Notable primarily for being the first text to recast the sutras of the Ashtadhyayi in the so-called Prakriya style, the Rupa Vitara obviously circulated widely in Chola, South India. Numerous inscriptions, for example, attest to the importance of the text in Sanskrit curricula throughout the Chola realm, recording donations for the upkeep of both teachers and students of the Rupa Vitara. Dharmakirti's text even warrants a mention in Tamil in the commentary on Amita Sakara's 10th century Yaparungalam Karihe. In explaining the import of the text title in his comments in the first verse, Gunasakara notes that his root text contains mnemonic verses, what he calls like the leading ones in the Urupavataram. In light of the Rupavatara's full-scale arrangement and thus reinterpretation of the Ashtadhyayi as the project of a Buddhist monk, the Viracoliyam's recasting of the Tolhapiam through Vadanul seems considerably less revolutionary. Although one cannot claim with any certainty that the Sanskrit Rupavatara provides a model for the sole chapter of the Viracoliyam, a number of parallels between the two texts are certainly very suggestive. Like the 3 verses of the Tamil introduction, for example, that link together in quick succession the Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, Agastya, Viracholan, the king, Tamil, and Sanskrit, the benedictory verses that open Dhammakirti's Sanskrit text praise in equally quick succession both Shiva and the Buddha. After the verse cited above that claims Maheshwara gave Sanskrit and Vyakarana to Panini, Dhammakirti goes on to praise the Buddha as Sarvagnya, all-knowing. Having bowed to the all-knowing one who is of limitless good qualities, I write this small, beautifully, and straightforwardly assembled Rupavataram for the purpose of instructing children. In a manner similar to the Viracoliyam, in other words, the Rupavatara draws out a lineage for the language it goes on to describe, through multiple figures, both divine and human, some straightforwardly Buddhist and others not. Like the Viracoliyam, the Rupavatara also offers a rearrangement and substantial condensation of the authoritative root text. The Tamil text narrows 1,500 plus verses in the Tolhapiam to 181. The Sanskrit text, in turn, completely reassembles the sutras of the Ashtadhyayi and leaves out nearly half, virtually eliminating any reference to Panini's rules governing Vedic usage and focusing instead on classical Sanskrit forms. As the title suggests, the Rupavatara focuses far more on proper form rather than Paninian rules of derivation. In appropriating the frameworks of Vadanul to analyze Tamil, the Viracoliyam echoes the Rupavatara in emphasizing proper form over any elaborate processes of development or adaptation. In fact, the Tamil text chapters on morphology and phonology follow the topical order of the Rupavataras directly. Not only does the Viracoliyam participate in radical rethinking of grammatical theory as an explicitly Buddhist project in the manner akin to the Rupavatara, but the Sanskrit text itself might have provided source material for Puttamitharam. Both texts engage in strategies of innovation of Vyakarana Yerata soul claimed for Buddhism that resonate throughout the subcontinent from the earliest fragments of the Kamaralata. The Rupavatara offers a full-scale rearrangement of the Ashtadhyayi in homage to Panini, Maheshwara, and an all-knowing Buddha. The Viracoliyam presents the first, and for another half millennium, full-scale rethinking of Tolhapiam's grammar through the framework of Sanskrit Vyakarana in the name of Avalohidan, Akatiyan, and Viracholan. The moves to edit out references to Vedic, to replace Shiva with Avalokiteshvara, to integrate Tamil and Sanskrit theories of language, perhaps point to wider patterns of Buddhist innovation. Similar patterns of creativity can be seen in Buddhist contributions to literature and literary theory throughout pre-modern South Asia, providing a broader context in which to evaluate both Buddhamitran's incorporation of Dandan and Purandevanar's broad anthologizing of Tamil literary history sensitive to Buddhist ethical concerns. I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about that in the future this week. In the context of such widespread and enduring Buddhist contributions to the development of both Sanskrit literature and Sanskrit literary theory, Puttamitran's interest in interpreting Dandan for Tamil poetry, no less Perundevanar's work of gathering together a body of Tamil literature that both illustrates well the compatibility of Tamil with Vadamurti and speaks to world views compatible with Buddhism, again render the association of each project with Avalohidan and the Buddha something other than coincidental. Although obviously composed in Tamil rather than in Sanskrit, the interest in using extant theory in new ways, and thus pushing both literary form and theory forward on the part of both the Viracoliyam and its commentary, reflects much wider Buddhist patterns of innovation and creativity. So to wrap up, in returning to the Viracoliyam and Perundevanar's commentary after something of a long hiatus on my part, both texts now appear simultaneously both more Tamil and more Buddhist, thoroughly embedded in complex ways in the scholarly conversations flowing through the Chola courts of medieval Tamil Nadu, yet equally situated in much broader currents of explicitly Buddhist discourses of grammar and poetics. Both texts, Tamil and Buddhist inclinations, perhaps go a long way toward explaining their relative uniqueness in South Indian literary history, their originality in analyzing Tamil through Sanskrit lenses, as well as their somewhat stunning lack of any obvious successors to that project for at least 5 to 6 centuries. As Tamil texts, the Viracoliyam and its commentary chart a unique course in theorizing Tamil directly through Vada, although framed by the Tolkapiam. Although a move typical of vernacularization processes in other linguistic regions, in the context of the emerging Brahminic focus on Sangam poetry in the Tolkapiam, as Jennifer has written about, as authentically Tamil, Chola, and Shaiva, theirs was a minority position at best. In wedding the treatment of Agustyus Tamil as divine language to Avalokhitan and the Buddha, the Viracoliyam and its commentary perhaps fell into disuse as a still enigmatic community of Tamil-speaking Buddhists disappeared, if such a community ever existed at all. As the first intentional theorization of Tamil grammar and poetics through principles developed for another linguistic milieu, the work of Puttamitran and Perendevanar marks an important point in South Asian intellectual history. The continuing story of the relationship of Tamil to Vadanul, of theory in multiple languages to literary composition in multiple language, certainly merits further scholarly investigation, as does the explicitly Buddhist contribution to such efforts. Thanks.
I noticed that the last 3 speakers have increasingly avoided eye contact with me. I don't know if it's
I don't want to see
it's where I'm sitting or something about Tamil scholarship, but anyhow, we have a little time for questions. I want to ask a question. You have situated very interestingly the Viracoliyam in this Buddhist context, and it rang a bell in the sense that if you compare it to the first text that introduces Dandin to Tibet, something similar happens in the sense that the first text that introduces Dandin to the Tamil landscape and to Tibet does it in a very short way, only about 40, 50 verses out of a much bigger framework. And then comes a second wave of more faithful adaptations, more serious engagements, followed by considerable further waves. So I was wondering about that, and also about why you thought that the readers of the Viracoliyam necessarily were expected to be conversant with the Sanskrit tradition as well. I wasn't sure why.
Well, again, focusing, both of them are good questions. Let me take the first one. The Viracoliyam is literally just lists of names. Some of them are transliterated from Sanskrit. Some of them are like Swabhavokti is Tanmai in Tamil. So that if you don't already have the broader context of the Sanskrit backdrop of Dundan, I'm not sure what you would do with this. What you'd have is a long, long laundry list. And then let's get in 2 verses or 3 verses, the many different kinds of Rupaka, the many different kinds. It's a laundry list. I think it's a theoretical effort, much more than it is any, like, can we take English and theorize it through Hebrew? That's the kind of project that it is. And it's one that, of course, doesn't, I mentioned this, Sanskrit is the mother of all Tamil words once in Tamil Nadu. This was not a good move on my part at all. I was shouted down by many men in the room. But nonetheless, I think it's largely a theoretical enterprise that doesn't make any sense if you're not only fully conversant in both languages. As for the brevity, that's an interesting question. I'm not actually sure why it's so brief. I think that perhaps that does explain why there is then a Dandi Alankaram in relative, either this had no audience or it was thought to be insufficient, even with the commentary, to explain, because it really is a laundry list. And those Alankara that are, I have another part of this paper that I didn't have time to read, why are certain Alankara, after all of them are listed and the different kinds of Rupaka, why are certain defined at some level? I think they're the ones that are in some ways most foreign to the Tolkapiam tradition, so there's at least a bit of discussion, of definition, but no examples, no anything. I don't think you can possibly work with this text if you don't have a command of both traditions, both languages.
Two questions. One is a follow-up to Igal's, and that is that so as you know, these alankaras are discussed in the Yaparangalam and the Virati, and there are these references to this anil that we don't know what it is, right?
Yeah.
So given that larger context of discussing alankara, to go back to your comment that that this was there was something about this that was the first, and that the readers would need access to the Sanskrit. I mean, given it does seem that there was this larger world, and that in theory there were examples to the Anila or some kind of maybe oral commentarial tradition. So what about this is the first in your mind in terms of the list?
It's the first that he's just the fact that Puttamitran feels he needs to say 3 times that he's following Dandan. He needs to say that 3 times. So let's take this other formalized aspect, a formalized list, and follow it. He does largely. And so I think that that's it, that he wants to take a very clear text. It's the only, is he following the Rupa Vitara? That's guesswork on my part. That's speculation. This he's very clear, and the commentator also falls all over himself saying Tantiyar, Tantiyar, Tantiyar. I think that they're trying to up the ante theoretically by saying that this isn't just something willy-nilly that's floating around in the air and we have all these ani that we can talk about, etc. But it's actually, look, we can take a specific text and theorize our own literary tradition through it. I think the references to Dandan are what make it different.
That makes sense. So given that there is this explicit gesturing to Dandi, so what do you make? I mean, there are points of deviation from Kavyadarsa, and notably, as you mentioned, well, there are several parts, but
there are several parts. Yeah, I didn't have time to mention them all.
But so this section that the Viracoliyam, the Alankara Padalam starts with this bit about the appropriate topics, appropriate vocabulary, and then ending with, as you say, these sort of bizarre genres that are related to the Coliam. So given what do you make of those deviations? I mean, why insert this section on appropriate vocabulary and
well,
usage?
I think that actually that what they're trying to do is, do I slavishly think they had the Kavyadarsa in Sanskrit and sort of took SparkNote versions of the text? No, I think that there's plenty of free-form other material that they want to work into that. They don't mark it, none of those verses, none of those deviations are marked as being Dandans. I don't think that's all that they're trying to do in the text. And the deviations, it's hard to exactly pin down what they're trying to do. Like, why are there 4 different, between the text and the commentary, why are there 4 different classifications? I don't think this is a how-to manual of how to write poetry. I think larger, it's here we have Varanul, we have Sanskrit texts, we have a Tamil literary tradition. On what ways can we bring them together and talk about them in coherent parts? And I think that leaves them with some rough edges around that they're not wearing. There's been a lot of debate over certain of these, largely in Tamil, there's been a lot of debate over where, are these stray verses, are they the Purvapakshans? Are they just extraneous other ideas? Is Puttamitran actually supporting these sections? It's unclear what they're doing there. So there are places where he deviates, but again, I think it's in keeping with, well, we also want to talk about the fact that we've got these other ideas about how genre, it's interesting, to me I haven't figured it out yet. Why genre? Why can genre be so flexible? Why suddenly have a unique take on the parts and functions of a simile? I'm not sure where that comes from. I have to do more work on this, but I suspect there's perhaps, given the Vadamori, Sanskrit language, I suspect there are other Sanskrit texts floating around, maybe commentaries, I don't know. Because when they deviate from Dandan, often at least in Perendevanar's commentary, there's some reference to Vadanul. We just don't know what Vadanul they're talking about. So that's a guess. Yeah. Yes.
So regarding the interest of Viracoliyam in Vyakarana, I've often been wondering why is it that it's an attempt at doing something, but it does not go very far.
Yeah.
And for instance, one of the tragedies is that they never compiled the Dhatupata. So without a Dhatupata,
We have no Dhatupata,
etc. And in one article I had written, I had compared the size of the Tattida Paralam with the Tadita section in Pioneer grammar.
Yeah.
And one is very small, one is one of the biggest sections.
Yeah.
So it seemed that the people who were interested in Tamil literature were not really interested in grammar. If they wanted to do grammar, they would do it in Sanskrit because it was the same people. These people spoke Tamil, but they would use Sanskrit for certain activities, just like today. If you want to do computer science, you cannot do it without English. So a number of activities were practiced only in Sanskrit. At the time of Tolkappiyam, it may have been different because Tolkappiyam was the first attempt at doing a description of a language which had never been described. And it was in a different context. But of course, the attempt was not continued. There are many aspects in the Tolkappiyam which are like a work in progress. But it's much more like that in the Viracoliyam. And another thing, Viracoliyam is very careful to say that he's interested in the good language.
Yes.
So at the beginning of Alangara Padalam, he distinguishes the good Varake and the Tetri Varake, which is the language spoken on the Tineg in front of the house, the Pial.
That's right. We don't want to talk about that. We're not realizing that.
So it seems to resemble what we have in the Tolkappiyam, Varakena Paluade, we are known Metri.
Right.
So if you want to know Varake, you have to ask educated people.
Right.
And but strangely, there is one place in the Viracoliyam where he makes a very strange sandhi with the word Tamil. He gives the dative of Tamil as Tamilke, which is some kind of sacrilege. And
So I'm not sure what to make of this. For the grammatical sections, I've been working my way through this Rupa Avataram. And it is striking. What in many ways I think the Yerata Soul sections of the Viracoliyam are deliberately summarizing and following. He does start out using this. He says he describes what he's doing as a siddhika. He's summarizing all of this. He's not claiming it to be a long explanation. He describes the Pairam describes this as a summary, wedding Tamil to Sanskrit. And I think that in the Yerata and Soul sections, he really is following the Rupa Avataram. I came across this text simply reading inscriptional evidence, and it's all over the place. Everybody's donating money to say, it's like the Rupa Avatara is sweeping the Tamil country inscriptionally. But I think it's meant to be just a kind of spark notes, cliff notes, kind of, notes to a kind of theorization. And there are some big holes in it. There are. I'm not sure what they're about. Let's wait for the microphone there.
Interesting. Okay, my question is, and this is something that I addressed to John Gold, who studied this Sapan knowledge as example. When you talk a lot about the Buddhist dimensions of this, and you talk something about a worldview. Could you say now, and maybe in just very general ways, what is Buddhist about the Viracoliyam? So you have Buddhist deities. What else? What makes this Buddhist?
Well, I would say that there's the content. So there is the content of to whom it's offered. There's the dismissal of Tamil comes from Shiva. And the Madurai Sangams, it comes from Agastya, from Avalohidan. That is played out throughout the text. The commentary is very clearly very interested in what we might call a kind of Buddhist ethos. Even in the love poetry that's quoted in the Puru section, the third chapter, all of the focus is on sort of the misery, the unhappiness of being in love. It's all kind of focused on that. But what I'm trying to suggest as well is that there's a larger, the Tolkappiyam is tapping into a larger Buddhist project, authored by Buddhists, of rethinking
The Viracoliyam, not the...
the Viracoliyam, but rethinking the Ashtadhyayi. So if you can rethink the Ashtadhyayi through the Rupa Vitara, why not think about rearranging the Tolhapiyam's treatment of Virata and soul? So I'm suggesting that that's actually more of a, perhaps a Buddhist project. It's very
what's Buddhist about a project of rearranging?
well, that it's that if you're looking for some kind of doctrinal Buddhism here.
No, I'm just saying anything. What
But
makes that Buddhist?
these efforts, I don't think it's a coincidence, which is all I argue in the paper. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's Buddhist authors who are recasting the Ashtadhyayi into the Rupa Vitara. I don't think it's coincidence that the text that wants to say that Sen Tamil, pure Tamil, can be theorized through Vadamurti, through Sanskrit. No Shaivas that Jennifer's worked on would reject that out of hand as even possible. What is being theorized by the commentator as literary includes devotional poetry, that in Tolhapiyam commentators who were Shaiva, devotional poetry is not properly literary. It's got the object is the god and it's something else. It's not literary. So there are all of these things. I mean, you can't say that because he's Buddhist he does this, but what I'm trying to point to is that the Viracoliyam looks a lot less strange as a Tamil text if you look at it in the context of the ways in which various Buddhist intellectuals are rethinking. I focused here on the grammatical tradition as well as the literary tradition. Okay. So how exactly does it matter that they're Buddhist? I think that's an open question.
But one of them is to be more open to this sort of translocal type of linguistic framework.
That's right.
And
that's right.
that does make sense for Buddhism, I would say.
That's right. And in the Tamil case, also the Jains are similarly open-ended.
We will have to stop. Here. We really have a tough schedule today, and tomorrow and after tomorrow. So, thank you so much, Anne.